Now look, when I ask, who do you think is the greatest Clipper point guard of all time? What do you think of? No, not R2D2 sidekick. I'm talking about future Hall of Famer Chris CP3 Paul. This man goes ahead and wins everywhere he ends up. And I mean everywhere. Go ahead, tell me what team he landed on and they didn't have a good season. I mean, let's just start with the New Orleans Hornets, where he got drafted, where a young CP3 really made a name for himself. Take it back to 2004. After yet another awful season for the Hornets, they would land with the 4th overall pick in 2005. And with some help from the NBA gods, they'd go ahead and draft a young kid from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Chris Paul would come out of the gates hot, as he'd average around 16 plus points, 7 assists, and 5 rebounds, all in his rookie season. Easily winning Rookie of the Year over the likes of Amonte Ellis, Darren Williams, and 6-man Lou Will. CP3 wouldn't let off the gas pedal heading into his 3rd year, as he'd have this ragtag group of Hornets players making the playoffs for the 3rd time in franchise history. And it didn't stop there, because Chris Paul, with a little help from David West, took this team past the 1st round for the first time ever in New Orleans Hornets history. And all of this wouldn't go unnoticed, as CP3'd go ahead and make his first ever All-Star team, one of many, if I may add. They'd begin the postseason slaying the 7th seeded Dallas Mavericks in 5 pretty not so decisive wins, like they were blowouts. However, this Cinderella season for the Hornets would come to an abrupt end in the 2nd round, when D West and CP3 seemed to not have enough oomph factor to them to push past the classic Santonio throuple in Manu, Tony Parker, and Mr. Fundamental, falling in 7 games. But with his first taste of playoff blood, CP3 would do anything to get more of it. So when his junior season ended, the guard locked in and had one of the best seasons of his career. With David West in his physical prime at 28 and a young Tyson Chandler holding it down in the post, Paul would go on to average a career high in points, assists, steals, and rebounds. Though it seemed to be all for naught, as the 49-win Hornets were defeated by Melo and the Denver Nuggets in the 1st round. In CP3's last 2 years in New Orleans, they managed to make the playoffs one more time, which is pretty solid. After being trapped there for 6 years, however, CP3 would demand a trade. And you can't blame him really, because who wouldn't at that point? And after a lot of drama around that whole requesting a trade ordeal, Chris would end up with the Los Angeles Clippers, where they paired him up with a baby Blake Griffin and really young DeAndre Jordan, while an almost retired Chauncey Billups was on the squad too. After not making the playoffs really ever since the turn of the century, the Clippers must have sold their soul for CP3, because this man would go on and take the franchise to the playoffs for 6 straight seasons, which was his entire tenure there. Lob City was also able to win 3 whole playoff series in their 6-year run, which is more than the Clippers had for the last 36 years before Chris Paul showed up. When 2017 came around, the Clippers organization and CP3 both felt as though their relationship had gone on for long enough, and so they'd ship him out off to Houston where he'd be paired up with eventual league MVP James Harden. And in Chris Paul's first season over there, they went ahead and messed around in the playoffs, ending up in the Western Conference Finals for the first time in the point guard's career. He even gave this franchise their first ever 60-win season, with some help from James, of course. But before we continue with the video, how about you scroll down below and smash that like button while clicking subscribe, because only 2% of you are subbed. Anyway, back to the video. Then, Chris Paul would go ahead and get injured in Game 4 of the Conference Finals with a right knee injury, which possibly took away his chance at a ring. The next season, Chris Paul and James Harden ran it back, but everything around the team and with the team got slightly worse than the year before, if we're being honest. But they still won the playoffs, so there's that. With Harden and CP3 slowly falling out with each other, the Rockets decided to stick with James, and Chris Paul would get shipped off once again, this time to a rebuilding Thunder team. Due to Chris Paul's contract, he knew there wasn't any way he was getting traded out of OKC. So he went and made the best of the season by ruining the organization's plans of tanking and taking that Thunder team that was supposed to lose into the playoffs. And that's just what this legendary Hooper does. It's like his superpower of taking struggling franchises and putting them in the postseason. When they made a very surprising push in that playoff, they weren't like 4-0 swept or anything, but they also didn't make it to the second round. This team took a way more talented Rockets team to Game 7 before falling, And so, going into free agency, Chris Paul was able to choose his own destiny this time, as he chose to sign with the Phoenix Suns, which is kinda, sorta, pretty, absolutely shocking at the time. And again, Chris Paul showed up to a struggling franchise, and guess what he did? That's right, he took the Suns to the playoffs for the first time in more than a decade. But this playoffs run was a little different than most of his previous ones. And I think y'all know what I mean by that. That's right, CP3 actually had success in May. Using the core that the Phoenix front office built, CP3 along with D-Book and DeAndre Ayton had this team in the NBA Finals. I know, So for the first time in Chris Paul's career, he'd do what the critics believe couldn't be done. He had success when it mattered most. And even though they'd end up with no championship, he was able to prove a lot of the haters wrong. And the only reason I'm making this video is because of what I think the Suns will do in this 2022 NBA playoffs. And that's bring the elusive finals ring right onto Chris Paul's finger, essentially cementing CP3's legacy as one of the greatest point guards of all time, and earning the name Point God. Now, if you've made it this far, how about a quick shout out to good old Zaza? But anyway, later.